into the mist. As the sun set on the small, sleepy town of Millfield, a thick fog began to roll in from the nearby woods. It crept through the streets, obscuring everything in its path. Most of the townspeople had already retreated to their homes for the night, but a few brave souls still roamed the streets. Among them was a young woman named Emily. She had just finished her shift at the local diner and was walking home when the fog enveloped her. She shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her as she walked. Suddenly, she heard a rustling in the bushes behind her. She spun around, but couldn't see anything in the thick fog. She started walking again, but the rustling continued. Emily picked up her pace, but the sound only grew louder. Panicked, she began to run, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the rustling getting closer and closer, and she knew that something was following her. Emily didn't dare to look back, knowing that she wouldn't be able to see anything in the thick fog. Just as she thought she was about to be caught, Emily burst through the door of her house and slammed it shut behind her. She leaned against the door, panting heavily. As she caught her breath, she realized that something was wrong. The house was silent to silent. There was no sign of her parents or her little sister, who should have been home. Emily called out their names, but there was no answer. She searched the house from top to bottom, but there was no sign of them. Panic set in as she realized that they were missing, and Emily knew that she had to find them. Armed with nothing but a flashlight, she ventured out into the fog once more. This time, she wasn't alone. She could feel something following her, watching her every move. Emily tried to shake the feeling, but it only grew stronger. As she made her way through the fog, Emily came across a small clearing in the woods. In the center of the clearing stood an old, dilapidated house. It was the kind of house that gave her chills just looking at it, with its peeling paint and boarded up windows. Emily knew that she shouldn't go near it, but something was drawing her closer. She approached the front door, and to her surprise, it swung open with a creak. Inside, the house was dark and musty, the air thick with the scent of decay. Emily heard a faint whispering sound, and she knew that she wasn't alone. She cautiously made her way through the rooms, searching for any sign of her family. As she turned a corner, Emily was confronted with a sight that made her blood run cold. In front of her was a figure shrouded in shadows. Its eyes glowed red, and its mouth twisted into a sinister grin. The figure moved closer, and Emily realized with horror that it was her little sister. But she was changed, her once bright eyes now dark and menacing. Emily tried to back away, but her sister's hand shot out and grabbed her. Emily screamed as she felt her sister's icy grip on her arm. She struggled to break free, but it was no use. Her sister's grip only grew stronger, and Emily could feel her life slipping away. At that moment, Emily realized that she was doomed. She had fallen into the clutches of the supernatural, and there was no escaping its grip. As she took her final breath, Emily knew that she would never leave the old, haunted house. Her fate was sealed, and she would forever be a part of the fog that crept through the town of Millfield. Days passed, and the people of Millfield began to notice something strange about the fog that had descended upon their town. It seemed to grow thicker, more oppressive with each passing night. Some whispered that it was cursed, that it was a harbinger of doom, but nobody knew the truth, that Emily's fate had become entwined with the fog. She was no longer just a victim of the supernatural, but a part of it, a vessel for its power. Every night, as the fog rolled in, Emily would rise from her resting place in the old, haunted house. She would wander the streets, searching for her next victim, drawing them closer with the promise of safety, and then ensnaring them in her icy grip. As more and more people disappeared, the people of Millfield grew terrified. They barricaded themselves in their homes, afraid to venture out into the fog. But it was no use. Emily was everywhere, inescapable. She was the fog, and the fog was her. One night, a group of brave townspeople decided to take action. They armed themselves with torches and pitchforks and set out into the fog, determined to put an end to the supernatural terror that had taken over their town. They searched for hours, but there was no sign of Emily or the haunted house. Just when they were about to give up, they stumbled upon a clearing in the woods. In the center of the clearing stood an old, dilapidated house. It was the same house that Emily had entered before she disappeared. The townspeople cautiously approached the house, weapons at the ready. They pushed open the door, and what they saw inside made them freeze in terror. Emily was there, but she was no longer alone. A group of shadowy figures surrounded her, their eyes glowing red like hers. They had taken her in, made her one of them, and now they were all together, ready to unleash their supernatural power on the world. The townspeople tried to flee, but it was too late. The fog had grown too thick, too oppressive. It was a living, breathing entity, and it enveloped the entire town, trapping them all inside its cursed embrace. And so it remains to this day, the town of Millfield shrouded in fog and terror. Emily and her supernatural allies still roam the streets, their power growing stronger with each passing day. They wait for more victims, more vessels for their power, knowing that they are now the masters of the fog, and all that lies within it. The townspeople who survived that night live in constant fear, never daring to venture out into the fog. They tell stories of Emily and the shadowy figures, warning their children to stay away from the haunted house, and to avoid the fog at all costs. But there are always those who don't listen, who think they are brave enough to face the supernatural. And so, every now and then, a new victim disappears into the fog, their fate unknown. Some say that the only way to break the curse is to destroy the haunted house, to rid the town of the supernatural presence that has taken hold. But nobody has been brave enough to try, and so the fog remains, a living nightmare that continues to haunt the people of Millfield. And so the town remains, shrouded in fog and terror, a warning to all who dare to tempt the supernatural. For in Millfield, the fog is not just a natural phenomenon, but a living, breathing entity, and those who enter it are never seen again. As the years passed, the legend of Millfield grew. People from neighboring towns whispered about the cursed fog and the haunted house at its center. Some came to investigate, eager to see if the legends were true, but they never returned. The supernatural presence in Millfield had grown stronger, and the fog had become thicker, more suffocating. It seemed to stretch beyond the town's borders, spreading its curse to the surrounding areas. Those who lived nearby avoided Millfield at all costs, unwilling to risk their own safety for the sake of curiosity. But there were always those who couldn't resist, drawn to the town like moths to a flame. One day, a group of paranormal investigators arrived in Millfield. They had heard about the cursed fog and wanted to see if they could capture any evidence of the supernatural. They entered the town with their cameras and recording equipment, determined to uncover the truth. But as soon as they stepped into the fog, they knew they had made a mistake. The fog was thick, almost palpable. It seemed to weigh down on them, suffocating them with its presence. They could barely see a few feet in front of them, and the sound of their own breathing echoed in their ears. They made their way towards the haunted house, their cameras at the ready. But as they drew closer, they heard a sound that made their blood run cold. It was the sound of laughter, a child's laughter, and it was coming from the haunted house. The investigators hesitated, unsure if they should proceed, but their curiosity got the better of them, and they pushed open the door. Inside, they saw something that they would never forget. Emily was there, as always, but this time she was holding a child in her arms. The child was laughing, but there was something off about him. His eyes were glowing, just like Emily's. The investigators tried to leave, but the fog had grown even thicker, trapping them inside the haunted house. They heard footsteps approaching, and they knew that they were not alone. Emily and her shadowy allies were there, ready to claim their next victims. The investigators tried to fight back, but it was no use. The supernatural power in Millfield was too strong. And so the paranormal investigators became the latest victims of the cursed fog, their fate unknown. The legend of Millfield continued to grow, a warning to all who dared to enter the fog. For in that town, the supernatural was not just a story, but a living nightmare that would claim anyone who dared to cross its path.